here to talk about mind control. A couple of things up front, though, as Norman's mentioned, I think a couple other people have mentioned. I'm not really here to bash. Another thing I'm not here to do is allege any kind of conspiracy. I don't think they're that smart. I was an elder for 10 years, and I can state categorically that at no time during that 10 years did we sit in the library in the Kingdom Hall and think, what can we do to mentally manipulate and control the minds of our congregation? But what I think, and I'll offer strictly an opinion here, is that the elements of mind control that we're going to talk about here are systemic within the Watchtower organization. And really, they're part of the culture. And one of the things, probably the most successful type of mind control there is when you teach someone to control their own mind the way that you want them to control it. It saves you a lot of work. Before we talk about what mind control is, we'll talk about what it isn't. There's a difference between mind control and brainwashing. A lot of people say, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses, they're brainwashed. I would disagree with that. Brainwashing was first, the term was coined in 1951 by a journalist named Edward Hunter, and he was writing about returning or present American POWs from the Korean conflict that had been captured by the North Koreans, subsequently taken by the Chinese, and they were re-educated. What they actually got these guys to do was to sign confessions confessing to war crimes that these guys knew that they had committed. But brainwashing is typically coercive. Mind control is subversive. Brainwashing is very direct. They haul you off somewhere, throw you in a room. They may apply physical force, and there's certainly mental force involved there. Whereas mind control is much more subversive, much more gentle. Brainwashing usually involves an adversarial relationship. It's you and them, and they're trying to get you to do something you really don't want to do. Mind control is usually between people who would otherwise be considered as friends or peers. Mind control is everywhere. Turn on your TV, you get about 5 minutes of TV program, and then you get about 5 minutes of mind control. They call it advertisements. The question is not whether or not mind control is there. The question is who is using it and for what purpose. Robert Jay Lifton wrote a work back in the 60s called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It's a tough read. The 8 criteria of mind control that I'm going to mention here came from that book. It's chapter 22 if you want to get into it. But as we look at these, think about your experience with the Watchtower and whether or not you have ever noticed any of these elements of mind control. The first one is called milieu control. Milieu is a French word that means basically your environment or your surroundings. And if you can control somebody's environment or their surroundings, you control their communication. You control their input, their output, and ultimately, you control their communication even with themselves, their very thoughts. There are many ways of achieving that. One that many of the communal cults use is communes, physical isolation. They physically withdraw from the outside world, and that and the rest of these techniques or elements of mind control are applied. There's other ways too, one of which is even if you don't do the physical isolation, there's mental isolation there. You can flood a person with so much information that they have trouble processing what you're giving them, much less anything that comes from outside. But you can also keep them so busy that they don't have time to investigate the information that you're giving them. Lifton wrote in his book, he says, through this milieu control, the totalist environment seeks to establish domain not only over the individual's communication with the outside. All that he sees and hears and reads and writes, his experiences and his expressions, but also in his penetration in his inner life, over what we may speak of as his communication with himself. And he says it creates an atmosphere uncomfortably reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. If you haven't read 1984, you really need to. I had not read it since long before I became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I read it after I got out and was just amazed at the similarities there. Animal Farm's another good one. It's a shorter read, but you'll see a lot of the same similarities there. Among Jehovah's Witnesses, we see the constant phrase, keep separate from the world. Well, it's a scriptural admonition. Now, the question is just how far do you carry it? We also see in an effort to control the input of information to its followers, we see the demonizing of people like us that are here tonight. They're scared to death of what we have to say. They're scared to death of us expressing ourselves and telling what we've dealt with. The good news is that milieu control never succeeds totally. You cannot totally isolate someone. The best that those who seek to control others can do is to limit the influence that the outside has on the people that they're trying to control. The second one of my favorites, as I was doing this, there were a couple of favorites. Mystical manipulation is one of my favorites. This is basically where the controller seeks to invest himself with a mystical aura, or a supernatural aura, thereby making himself a whole lot more than he really is, and exercising that much control over others. I'll give you some examples. Norman loves his Revelation book, so do I. We're going to spend a little time in that. I didn't bring the book with me. I just copied and pasted from the CD-ROM. It's one of the best tools there is. It's the Watchtower CD-ROM, because you can find anything you need pretty quickly. Here's what they write. This is on pages 11 and 12. In the Bible, anointed Christians are called Jesus' brothers, and as his brothers, they share the same father and the same mother. Their father is Jehovah God, hence their mother must be the woman, God's lifelike celestial organization. They become a secondary part of the seed, Christ Jesus being the primary part. The congregation of these Spirit-begotten Christians on earth make up God's visible organization that serves under his woman-like organization in the heavens, where they will be united with Christ Jesus at their resurrection. So first of all, this anointed, or the 144,000, are cast as Christ's brothers, secondary part of the seed. It's pretty important. Continuing on page 16, under the subheading Channel of Communication. Thus John received the inspired record through an angelic messenger. He wrote it in a scroll, transmitting it to the congregations of his time. Happily for us, God has preserved it for the encouragement of the more than 50,000 congregations of his united servants on earth today. God had a channel for communicating revelation in John's day, and John was the earthly part of that channel. Likewise, God has a channel for giving spiritual nourishment to his slaves today. In his great prophecy concerning the conclusion of the system of things, Jesus identified the earthly part of this channel as the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time. He uses this John class in unlocking the meaning of prophecy. So here they've identified themselves as the faithful and discreet slave, as the John class, people in the same class as John that God used to communicate revelation. This John class always cracked me up. I have to say it. John class sounds like body training to me, but anyway. It's interesting too, sorry, that this term only appears 123 times in Watchtower literature. It appears 119 times just in the Revelation book. They only used it 4 times elsewhere, so somebody must have told them the joke too. Anyway, what they've done here is they've really invested themselves with this mystical aura. Here they are, the faithful and discreet slave class, the John class. But who wrote this? The faithful and discreet slave. So you end up with this circular question. Who are you? Oh, we're the faithful and discreet slave. Well, how do we know that? Well, because we told you. Well, why should we believe you? Because we're the faithful and discreet slave. And you start all over again. Well, continuing